Johnny Carson told people about 9 famous guests who were really mean. For 30 years, Johnny Carson brought America's biggest stars to people's living rooms all over the country. His warm smile and easy laugh made people watching feel like they were seeing old friends talk over coffee. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience went home, Carson's smile often went away. People who knew him well said that America's favorite TV host kept a list in his head of guests he thought were really terrible people. Johnny was great at his job on camera, said a person who worked on The Tonight Show for more than 10 years. But the minute we stopped filming, he would sometimes turn to Ed and whisper, "That person should never be on TV or near kids." In his last years, Carson started telling the truth about the famous people he secretly hated during his job. The stories he told close friends show a scary picture of beloved stars who were monsters behind their fake, nice, public faces. Most shocking were Carson's stories about one famous actress who seemed sweet and weak on his couch, but backstage had yelled at a young worker so badly that security guards had to step in. And the beloved male star who Carson caught doing something so gross in his dressing room that the host almost called the police. These weren't just hard-to-work-with people or demanding stars. Carson said these were really dark people hiding behind fame and talent. Bad people who hurt others, abused people, and tricked people who the movie business protected for many years. But first, we need to understand why the first name on Carson's list got his strongest hate, and the private backstage fight no one has ever told about until now. Well, first of all, I'm stage-struck, and I think they all know that. Secondly, I try to get a film that has audience identification. Joan Crawford, the Hollywood queen with ice in her heart. When Joan Crawford came on The Tonight Show in 1970, people watching saw the nice Hollywood legend they'd loved for many years. With her perfect posture, perfect look, and practiced charm, Crawford showed off old Hollywood style. But many Tonight Show workers said Crawford's behavior when cameras weren't rolling showed a very different person. "She was one of the coldest people I've ever talked to," Carson reportedly told his book writer years later. "Like talking to a beautiful statue with nothing inside." Crawford's visit started causing problems before she even got to the studio. Her demands included special lighting needs so detailed that the show's tech director still had the 4-page note in his files many years later. Everything had to be just right. Remembered a person who used to work on the show. The angle of her chair, how high Johnny's desk was, even the temperature of the studio, exactly 67 degrees, not 66, not 68. When Crawford finally got there 3 hours before filming, she brought her own makeup team. Even though the show had award-winning makeup artists working there, but what really showed Crawford's true self was how differently she treated people based on how important they were. "She almost bowed down to Johnny," said a stage worker who was there that day. But when a young production helper accidentally walked into her dressing room with water she had asked for, Crawford exploded. Many people who saw it said Crawford started yelling so mean that workers in the hallway stopped and stared in shock. She reportedly called the helper, a 20-year-old woman just starting in the business, a stupid little person, and said she should find work at a bad place where being dumb might help. The young woman ran away crying, and Crawford demanded she be fired. Carson's producer said no, creating tension that lasted through the whole filming. But the most disturbing thing about Crawford's visit wasn't just how she treated workers. It was the calculating way she changed the moment cameras turned on. She was like a robot pretending to be a woman, one producer remembered. She had practiced every answer, every laugh, every natural moment. Nothing was real. During commercial breaks, Crawford would right away drop her smile and sit with a stone face, not talking to anyone, then instantly come back to life when the red light came back on. Carson, known for making guests comfortable, struggled to find any real connection with Crawford. After the show, he reportedly told Ed McMahon, "I've talked to dead people with more personality." Years later, when Christina Crawford's book, Mommy Dearest, told about Joan's supposed abuse of her adopted children, Carson wasn't surprised. Close friends said he simply nodded and said, "I saw who she really was in those few hours. I believe every word." But if Crawford's cold calculation made Carson uncomfortable, his next enemy was something he found even more disturbing. Raw power used to scare and threaten people. I can answer that by telling you that, in those lovely moments, I play Daphne and Chloe or the Frank Sinatra, the charming bully Carson couldn't stand. On screen, Frank Sinatra and Johnny Carson seemed to share a friendly, even nice relationship. The legendary singer would joke, tell stories, and sometimes perform, while Carson played the respectful host. Behind the scenes, however, Carson reportedly had a deep dislike for Sinatra. Not for his talent, which Carson respected, but for how Old Blue Eyes treated people when he thought no one important was watching. If he didn't sing, he'd be a mob tough guy, Carson once told a friend, according to many books written about him. And sometimes I think he was both. Sinatra's visits on The Tonight Show were famous among crew members for the tension they created. Longtime workers said Sinatra would arrive with a group of up to 8 men who were described as not show business types, more like guys you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. These men would spread through the studio watching workers and creating a feeling one cameraman described as like being spied on. But what really bothered Carson was seeing how Sinatra treated people he thought were beneath him. During one visit, in the early 1970s, a floor manager made the mistake of giving Sinatra the standard 3 minutes warning before his part. Many people who saw it said Sinatra grabbed the man by his tie and pulled him close, saying, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The floor manager, a Korean War veteran in his 50s, was clearly shaken afterward. When Carson saw this happen from his office TV, he almost canceled the part. Only the producer reminding him of the ratings Sinatra would bring convinced him to continue. Another problem was Sinatra's reliability, or lack of it. He reportedly canceled visits last minute many times, including once just 2 hours before filming when he was already in the building, but decided he wasn't in the mood. The most telling moment came during a commercial break when Sinatra made a mean comment about a female worker's looks, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Carson, breaking his usual professional distance, coldly responded, "We don't talk about my workers that way here." The tension was obvious, with Sinatra clearly surprised that anyone, even Johnny Carson, would challenge him. When the cameras returned, both men kept their professional faces, but crew members noticed Carson's questions became much shorter and less interested. After that visit, Carson reportedly told his producer, "I don't care what his ratings are. Limit him to once a year maximum." What makes this really important is that Carson rarely got involved in booking decisions and almost never banned guests completely. For him to limit Sinatra's visits spoke volumes about his personal distaste for the singer's behavior. While Sinatra represented the bullying side of celebrity power, Carson's next problem guest showed a different kind of difficult: the huge ego that recognized no boundaries or TV show rules. Now, the argument against what I'm saying is that the world is full. All the best young directors are soaked. Orson Welles, the genius who thought rules were beneath him. Orson Welles came on The Tonight Show many times during the Carson years, always making memorable television with his big voice, larger-than-life presence, and amazing stories from his famous career. People watching at home saw a charming, brilliant storyteller. Carson and his workers saw something else: a man whose ego had grown so huge that he believed normal rules of television simply didn't apply to him. "Never again," Carson reportedly said, after one really difficult Welles visit. "That guy thinks he's still running Rome." The problems usually started before Welles even got to the studio. Tonight, show writers said Welles routinely dismissed any prepared questions or topics Carson's team had developed. "He told us our questions were boring and obvious," one former writer remembered. "He literally crossed them all out and handed back an empty page." This put Carson in the uncomfortable position of having to interview one of movies' most important people with no preparation or plan, a particular challenge given Welles's tendency to launch into long, wandering stories that were hard to edit for time. During one visit in the mid-1970s, Welles was scheduled for a 7-minute part. He stayed on the couch for nearly 25 minutes, ignoring many subtle hints from Carson that it was time to wrap up. Johnny had a series of signals he would give guests when time was running short, a director explained. Welles saw them all and just kept talking. We had to bump 2 other guests entirely. Welles's behavior towards workers was equally dismissive. He reportedly refused to speak directly to production helpers, instead talking about them in the third person, even when they were standing right beside him. Tell the girl I need more water or ask the boy to adjust the light. What really annoyed Carson, according to those who knew him well, was Welles's habit of treating The Tonight Show as if it were his own personal platform rather than Carson's program. Orson would bring props, change topics without warning, and even try to direct camera shots from his seat. A former producer explained, "He once actually stood up and tried to tell our camera operators which angles to use." Johnny was furious. After one really challenging visit, Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon, "Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to take over someone else's show." Carson, himself a perfectionist about television production, found Welles's disregard for the medium's rules especially annoying. Though he kept public respect for Welles's huge contributions to film, privately he began to view him as a warning story of what happens when talent is eclipsed by ego. While Welles represented the challenge of containing an oversized personality, Carson's next difficult guest brought a different problem. Unpredictable behavior that could quickly turn hostile, spelled out in light bulbs. Besides something called a temperament, which consists most Bette Davis, Hollywood's queen of mean words. When Bette Davis came on The Tonight Show, audiences saw the legendary actress at her most engaging, telling witty stories in her distinctive voice, elegant, even in her later years, and filled with fascinating Hollywood history. What they didn't see were the moments before and after the red light came on, when Davis reportedly showed a personality so rough that even the unshakable Carson was taken aback. "She doesn't need a stage, she needs a courtroom," Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon after one really difficult visit. No one should have to be questioned by Bette Davis without a lawyer present. Davis' first offense, according to many Tonight Show worker accounts, was her treatment of other guests. When booked on episodes with multiple celebrities, Davis would often interrupt or talk over them, especially if they were younger performers or women. She would physically turn her back on other guests on the couch. A former talent coordinator remembered, "If someone else was telling a story that got laughs, you could see her getting mad, planning how to regain control." Behind the scenes, Davis's behavior was even more problematic. She reportedly demanded whiskey in her dressing room before visits. Not unusual for guests of her era, but her alcohol drinking sometimes led to inappropriate comments and behavior. Female workers who worked on the show in the 1970s said Davis regularly used sexist and racist language that shocked even by the standards of that time. One makeup artist remembered Davis refusing her services, asking instead for someone whose hands don't shake like they're coming off a 3-day drunk. Carson, who generally avoided confrontation, made an exception for Davis when she began yelling at a cue card holder for being too slow during a rehearsal. Johnny actually stepped in, remembered a production assistant who saw the incident. He very quietly told her, "Miss Davis, on this show we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." She was stunned, probably not used to being challenged, but she backed down. What made Davis really difficult for Carson was the contrast between her undeniable talent and her treatment of others. Unlike some difficult guests who could be dismissed as talentless, Davis was a genuine legend whose work Carson admired. After her final visit on the show in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly told his producer, That's the last time. Life's too short to spend it being verbally beaten up by Bette Davis, no matter how many Oscars she has. While Davis at least directed. Her mean words at adults who could defend themselves. Carson's next problem guest brought a different kind of discomfort behavior toward young women that crossed professional boundaries. Some too. Oh, sure, I make you strong and tall. Mickey Rooney, the aging child star with wandering hands. Mickey Rooney was Hollywood royalty, the #1 box office star from 1939 to 1941, and a living connection to the industry's golden age. His visits on The Tonight Show should have been nostalgic celebrations of an amazing career. Instead, according to many worker accounts, Rooney's visits became famous for his inappropriate behavior, chaotic energy, and occasional drinking. He thinks being short gives him permission to be a pervert, Carson reportedly told his producer after one really problematic visit in the mid-1970s. Rooney, then in his mid-50s, developed a reputation among female workers for unwanted touching, suggestive comments, and ignoring professional boundaries. Many accounts said young production helpers would ask to be moved to other jobs when they learned Rooney was booked. He would grab your hand when you brought him water, try to pull you closer, ask if you were married. Remembered a former assistant who worked on the show in the late 1970s. If you tried to leave, he'd hold on to your wrist just a little too long. Even more concerning was Rooney's apparent inability to recognize when he'd had too much to drink. Tonight Show employees said he appeared clearly drunk during at least 3 separate visits, slurring words and losing his train of thought mid-sentence. During one infamous part in 1977, Rooney began telling a story about Judy Garland that quickly became inappropriate, forcing Carson to cut him off and change to a different topic. During the commercial break, Carson reportedly asked his producer, "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" What made Rooney really difficult for Carson was the generational gap in understanding what was appropriate behavior. Born in 1920, Rooney came from an era of Hollywood where certain conduct toward women was common, if not approved of. Johnny was no prude, but he had clear lines about professional conduct, explained a director who worked on the show for many years. Rooney seemed genuinely confused when called out on his behavior, like he didn't understand why it was a problem. After one visit where Rooney made repeated comments about a young actress, also appearing on that night's show, Carson took the unusual step of apologizing to her personally after the filming. "I've never seen Johnny so embarrassed by a guest behavior," the director remembered. He told her, "That's not how professionals act on my show, and it won't happen again." True to his word, Rooney's visits became less frequent in the late 1970s and early 1980s, with Carson reportedly insisting on daytime pre-recordings rather than live evening broadcasts when Rooney was booked. While Rooney's behavior created uncomfortable situations, Carson's next challenging guest brought a different kind of difficulty. Demands so extensive and unreasonable, they became legendary among the workers. "Yeah, I don't think my last marriage was one day, and I didn't think it will last that long." Zsa Zsa Gabor, the diva who drove Carson to despair. With her glamorous appearance, distinctive accent, and flirtatious personality, Zsa Zsa Gabor was a Tonight Show favorite who appeared dozens of times during Carson's time there. Viewers saw a charming, over-the-top personality who played up her Hungarian background and many marriages for laughs. Behind the scenes, according to numerous workers' accounts, Gabor was one of the most demanding, difficult guests in the show's history. "I'd rather interview a cat," Carson reportedly joked after a really exhausting Gabor visit. At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and special lighting. Gabor's demands began long before she got to the studio. Former Tonight Show employees said her standard requirements included a specific temperature in her dressing room, 74 degrees, fresh flowers, orchids only, no carnations, a bottle of Perrier water with exactly 3 ice cubes, her own lighting technician flown in at the show's expense. No female guests who were younger than 40 booked on the same episode. Her list read like a joke of celebrity demands, remembered a former talent coordinator. "We thought it was a joke the first time we got it." When these requirements weren't met exactly, Gabor reportedly would refuse to leave her dressing room until the situation was fixed, often delaying filming and messing up the entire show's schedule. One of the most famous incidents happened when Gabor arrived for a filming and discovered the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation. Many witnesses said she got into a shouting match with the head makeup artist, demanding someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to buy the correct product. Johnny actually had to step in. A former producer remembered. He called her directly and said something like, "Zsa Zsa, honey, you look beautiful already and we have a show to do. Let's save the makeup emergency for another day." What really annoyed Carson about Gabor's behavior was how it affected the overall production. Other guests would be kept waiting, crew members would have to work overtime, and the show's carefully planned schedule would be thrown into chaos. After one visit where Gabor arrived 40 minutes late and then complained about her introduction, Carson reportedly told his executive producer, "Next time she wants to be on, tell her we've renamed the show The Tonight Show, starring Zsa Zsa Gabor, and I'll be happy to be her sidekick." Despite these frustrations, Gabor continued to appear on the show throughout Carson's time there, a testament to her undeniable entertainment value when the cameras were actually rolling. While Gabor's diva demands created logistical headaches, Carson's next challenging guest brought a different kind of discomfort, unpredictable behavior that could quickly turn a light-hearted interview into an uncomfortable confrontation. Cow, the obnoxious mama. Shelley Winters, the unpredictable powder keg. Shelley Winters was a two-time Oscar winner with a career spanning decades, from glamorous roles in her youth to character parts in her later years. On paper, she should have been an ideal Tonight Show guest, experienced, accomplished, and full of Hollywood stories. In reality, according to those who worked on the show, Winters was one of Carson's most unpredictable and explosive guests. "Shelley doesn't talk, she explodes," Carson reportedly said after one really explosive visit. Winters became famous among the show's workers for her inability or unwillingness to adapt to the light, entertainment-focused format of late-night television. Rather than sharing amusing stories or promoting current projects, she would often launch into intense political, angry speeches or deeply personal revelations that left Carson visibly uncomfortable. During one visit in the mid-1970s, what began as a simple question about a recent film quickly evolved into Winters delivering a 5-minute uninterrupted speech about government corruption, leaving Carson struggling to find a way to lightheartedly transition to a commercial. Johnny was a master of controlling conversations, but with Shelley, it was like trying to steer a tornado, remembered a former director. Once she got going, all he could do was wait for her to run out of steam. Winters' unpredictability wasn't limited to her conversational topics. She became known for physical outbursts as well. In one famous incident on a British talk show, she threw a glass of whiskey in fellow guest Oliver Reed's face after he made sexist comments. This reputation for explosiveness made Tonight Show workers nervous whenever she was booked. "We would actually remove certain items from the set when we knew she was coming," admitted a former stage manager. "Anything that could be thrown or knocked over would mysteriously disappear before her parts." Despite these challenges, what distinguished Winters from some of Carson's other difficult guests was that her behavior seemed to stem from genuine passion rather than meanness or ego. She cared deeply about political and social issues and saw every public appearance as an opportunity to address them regardless of whether it was the right place. Carson, while visibly uncomfortable during her more intense moments, maintained a certain respect for Winters' authenticity. After one really fiery visit where she criticized the Vietnam War, Carson reportedly told his producer, "I may not want to vacation with her, but at least she means every word she says." Nevertheless, Winters' visits became less frequent in the later years of Carson's time there, with the host preferring guests whose conversational style complemented rather than challenged the show's format. While Winters' passionate unpredictability created on-air challenges, Carson's next difficult guest represented something he found personally distasteful: extreme political views that targeted vulnerable communities. "I like big muscles and red corpuscles. I like a beautiful Jane Russell," the star whose politics Carson couldn't stomach. Jane Russell was one of Hollywood's most iconic sex symbols of the 1940s and 50s. Known for films like The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. With her striking beauty and significant place in film history, she seemed like a natural, recurring guest for The Tonight Show. Yet, after a few visits in the early 1970s, Russell rarely returned to Carson's couch, a decision that, according to show insiders, came from Carson's discomfort with her increasingly extreme political views and reported treatment of LGBTQ+ workers. Carson, while personally a moderate Republican for much of his life, maintained a strict policy of keeping The Tonight Show relatively neutral on divisive political issues. Russell, however, reportedly used backstage interactions to express hardline conservative views that Carson found troubling. "Johnny could handle guests having different political opinions," explained a former producer. "What bothered him was when those opinions turned into personal attacks on workers or other guests." Many accounts said Russell became famous for making mean comments about LGBTQ+ individuals working on the show. During one visit in the early 1970s, she reportedly refused to allow a gay makeup artist to touch her face, demanding a replacement. Even more concerning to Carson was a reported incident involving Rock Hudson. A talent coordinator who worked on the show said Russell refused to be booked on the same episode as Hudson, making mean comments about his sexuality, which, though not publicly known at the time, was known within Hollywood circles. Johnny had many friends in the gay community, including several workers. The talent coordinator remembered, "He was ahead of his time in not tolerating that kind of discrimination on his show." Carson's final breaking point with Russell reportedly came during a 1973 visit when she made dismissive comments about civil rights laws during a commercial break, though not picked up on broadcast microphones. Her remarks were overheard by several crew members and reportedly reached Carson's ears. After that visit, Russell was noticeably absent from The Tonight Show's guest list for the remainder of Carson's time there, one of the few clear cases where Carson appears to have personally banned future bookings. What made this situation really notable was Carson's general reluctance to ban guests outright, especially those with Russell's level of star power and historical significance to Hollywood. For him to take such a definitive stance spoke volumes about how strongly he objected to her behavior. While Russell's politics and treatment of workers created a permanent rift with Carson, his final and perhaps most intense dislike was reserved for a comedian whose public persona and private behavior were reportedly worlds apart. "I've never asked you this, but I'm asking you now simply, purely." Jerry Lewis, the comedian Carson called truly hateful. Jerry Lewis was one of America's most successful entertainers, a groundbreaking comedian, actor, director, and humanitarian known for his annual TV shows benefiting muscular dystrophy research. His manic energy and physical comedy had made him a global star. Behind the scenes, according to numerous Tonight Show worker accounts, Lewis was also one of the most difficult, demeaning celebrities in Hollywood, a reputation that earned him a special place on Carson's personal blacklist. "He's what happens when ego outruns talent," Carson reportedly told a colleague after a really troublesome Lewis visit in the mid-1970s. Unlike some difficult guests who saved their worst behavior for underlings, Lewis reportedly made no secret of his disdain for Carson himself. During one famous visit, Lewis repeatedly talked over Carson, hijacked questions intended for other guests, and at one point actually reached over and adjusted Carson's tie without permission, a move that visibly annoyed the normally unshakable host. Johnny hated people touching him without permission. A former producer explained, "It was a well-known rule. You don't touch Johnny unless he starts it." Lewis knew this and did it anyway as a power move. Lewis's treatment of crew members was reportedly even worse. Many accounts said he would refuse to learn workers' names, referring to them as, "Hey, you," or by their job, camera guy, makeup girl, regardless of their experience or seniority. One really disturbing incident happened when a camera operator reportedly coughed quietly during Lewis's rehearsal. Many witnesses said Lewis stopped everything and launched into a tirade, screaming that the cameraman was a professional who breathes like an amateur, and demanding he be removed from the studio. Jerry screamed at a camera op for breathing loudly, confirmed a floor manager who was present. Not talking, breathing. The poor guy had allergies. What Carson found most objectionable about Lewis was the contrast between his public persona as a tireless champion for children and his private behavior toward people who couldn't benefit his career. The fake nice guy routine made Johnny's skin crawl. Remembered a producer who worked closely with Carson. He'd watched Jerry cry on his TV show about loving children, then come to our show and treat people like they were less than human. After Lewis's final visit on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly told his executive producer simply, "Never again." Though Carson rarely banned guests outright, Lewis joined the small group of celebrities who were effectively blacklisted from the show during its final decade. Years later, when asked about Lewis at a private dinner, Carson reportedly said, something that shocked those present, with its uncharacteristic harshness. In a town full of phonies, he stands out as truly hateful, and that takes some doing. What Carson's blacklist reveals about Hollywood's true nature. Johnny Carson's private feelings about these 9 difficult guests: Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, Bette Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Shelley Winters, Jane Russell, and Jerry Lewis offer a rare, unfiltered glimpse into Hollywood's reality behind the carefully maintained facade of glamour and charm. Johnny saw everything, explained a longtime Tonight Show producer. For 30 years, every major star had to go through him to reach the American public. He knew who was genuine and who was faking it. What makes Carson's assessments particularly valuable is that he had no reason to exaggerate or invent negative stories. Unlike tabloid journalists or disgruntled employees with axes to grind, Carson was at the absolute pinnacle of the entertainment industry. He had nothing to gain by criticizing these celebrities, and everything to lose if his honesty damaged relationships with potential guests. Johnny wasn't looking to make enemies, noted his former producer. Just the opposite, he wanted every interview to go smoothly. When he disliked someone, it was because they had made it impossible not to. Carson's unique position, part gatekeeper, part confessor to the stars, gave him an unparalleled perspective on celebrity culture. For 3 decades, stars revealed sides of themselves on his couch that they showed nowhere else, creating a bond of trust that made Carson's private judgments all the more significant. Perhaps most revealing is how Carson distinguished between guests who were merely difficult and those he considered truly problematic. He tolerated eccentricity, nervousness, even moderate ego. Understanding these came with the territory of fame. What he couldn't abide was cruelty, especially toward those with less power. Johnny had a simple test, remembered his longtime director. How did they treat the pages, the assistants, the guys working the cameras? That told him everything he needed to know about someone's character. In the years since Carson's death in 2005, many of his private opinions have been validated by broader revelations about these celebrities. Christina Crawford's allegations about her mother, Joan. Reports about Sinatra's connections to organized crime and stories of Mickey Rooney's inappropriate behavior have all been corroborated by multiple sources. This suggests Carson wasn't just being judgmental. He was recognizing genuine character flaws that Hollywood's publicity machine worked overtime to conceal from the public. The most sobering aspect of Carson's blacklist is how effectively the studio system protected these celebrities, despite their behavior being known to industry insiders. Long before social media and cancel culture, stars could maintain pristine public images while behaving abominably in private, secure in the knowledge that the studios, networks, and publications all had vested interests in maintaining their marketability. Today, one cell phone video could end a career, observed a former Tonight Show writer. Back then, someone could throw a chair at an assistant, and as long as they sold tickets, the story would never leave the building. As we look back on Hollywood's golden age with nostalgia, Carson's unvarnished assessments serve as a valuable reminder that our cultural icons have always been fallible, complicated human beings, sometimes inspiring, sometimes disappointing, and occasionally truly disturbing behind their carefully crafted public personas. Johnny used to say, "The camera doesn't just add 10 LEBs, it adds a layer of fiction," remembered his longtime producer. His greatest skill wasn't just interviewing people, it was seeing through that fiction to the truth underneath. Thank you for watching this exploration of Johnny Carson's most difficult guests. If you found this journey into television's golden age revealing, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into entertainment history. And if these Tonight Show revelations shocked you, wait until you see our next video exposing the beloved 80s sitcom, where cast members were secretly tormented by the child star, whose cute on-screen antics hid violent outbursts so severe that producers installed panic buttons on set. Click the bell icon so you don't miss this bombshell. Hollywood Exposé dropping next.